of the nominations for the Nursing Field of Study Advisory Committee will not be able to serve on the committee at this time, so we will need to vote on that. The consent calendar, except for that. Any questions? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Have a motion?
Moved.
And a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes. Agenda item 4 is public testimony, and we do not have any testimony at this time. Agenda item 5 begins our Committee on Academic Workforce Success. 5A is an update on the RAND Graduate Education Study. This will be given by Charles Goldman and Rita Karim. It's an information item only.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rita and I are very pleased to be with you once again today to give you a considerably more substantive update than we've given you at the last two committee meetings. As you know, there's a lot of graduate education in this state. Maybe there's a lot of everything in this state. Texas public universities on health-related institutions currently award about 44,000 graduate degrees each year. In the past 10 years, there were about 500 new graduate programs proposed formally. Of those, about 400 were approved. But interestingly, about 400 were also closed and consolidated over the same period of time, so that the total number of degree programs remained almost exactly the same from the beginning to the end of the 10-year period. This study is going to support strategic planning. We've been working with the Graduate Education Advisory Committee. We had a full-day meeting with them 3 months ago and a 2-hour meeting with them earlier this week. And they will be embarking on a strategic planning process that will ultimately provide a draft strategic plan to coordinating board staff and eventually to you at the board. We have 3 objectives in the study. So first is to look at what's the need to expand graduate education in the state. The second is to provide guidance to the board staff, and the institutions on how to prepare and evaluate program proposals for graduate degrees. And finally, to analyze policies that can manage the expansion that the state may need. We've been making progress. We have mostly completed the research phase of the study. We still have a little bit of a few tasks that we're finishing up, and I'll show you that in terms of the schedule, as I mentioned, we met with the GIAC members by telephone for an informal session earlier this week. We're meeting with you today. We will next turn our attention to drafting the draft report. We're aiming to have that available for you and for the institutions, members of the public, sometime toward the end of August, and to allow perhaps 6 weeks or so for public comment period. We will come back and see you at the end of September at your meeting for a more brief session in case you have questions or you would like to discuss anything that's in the draft report before we finalize it. We're aiming to finalize the content of the report by December and have it edited and published no later than February 2017. We're using a mixed group of methods in the study. We've got quantitative data on degree completions, other performance indicators, and as I'll show you, labor market measures. We're doing case studies in 12 Texas institutions, specifically focused on 6 example fields. We speak to institutional leadership, departmental leadership and faculty, as well as a small selection of employers in each of those fields. We're also looking at the other 3 largest states in the country, California, New York, and Florida. We're looking at how they organize their higher education system, how they manage and approve graduate programs. And that will help us also to give you some ideas about policies you might want to adopt here in Texas. For the case studies, we selected 12 institutions. We told the institutions that we would not identify them, and we've been careful in that regard. The institutions are distributed across all the peer groups of the public institutions, as you can see on the chart here. We also selected 6 case study fields. Now, the study is not restricted to these fields, but we found it useful to have a variety of fields so that we could get a sense of what's going on. And so the fields are education, nursing, physical therapy, statistics, geographic information science, or GIS, and electrical engineering. And we chose these 6 fields because we wanted to include large and small fields. We wanted to include fields that have been very stable and well established for many decades, and also some fields that are emerging, changing, or new. We also wanted to include some fields that have a very clear and specific connection to occupations, like nursing or physical therapy, and also some fields that have a much more indirect connection to the labor market, for instance, statistics, so that we could get a sense about how issues differed according to those dimensions. We have completed most of the interviews for the project. We've done the 12 university and higher ed institution visits. We spoke to a total of 145 administrators and faculty members over the course of those visits. We have also talked to 3 of the staff sections of university systems in the state to get a sense of the system perspective, a total of 7 staff that we've spoken to. We are aiming to talk to 3 states. We've finished our interviews with New York and California. We haven't yet done the interviews with Florida, but we're hoping to do that. We're aiming to try to get 3 employers in each of the 6 disciplines to speak with us. So far, we've completed 8 of those 18 targeted interviews. We're actually running into some difficulty in getting cooperation from employers, which is not unusual in this kind of work. For some reason, we've run into the most resistance in the field of nursing. And I don't know if any of you may know something that's going on that I don't, but we've actually been turned down by multiple large healthcare providers in the state saying, you know, we don't want to be part of your study. So we're hoping that there are enough healthcare providers in the state that we'll eventually find some who are willing to talk to us.
It's a very competitive group for a certain select number of nurses. And so they may think that, you know, that if they participate, it'll be published and it might look like, oh, well, this hospital is really short of nurses and it might reflect badly on them. So I can.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll, what we've, you know, we have to manage the calendar and the resources. What we've decided to do on the team is we've decided to make formal requests of up to 10 large healthcare providers in the state. And if we still can't manage to get 3 of them to talk to us at that point, we might reluctantly call it quits. There are also other people we could talk to, for instance, at the Board of Nursing or other organizations that would give us insight into the labor market. So we'll try to figure something out. But I was a little, I mean, it's relatively unusual for employers to directly and clearly refuse participation. Normally, they just make themselves difficult to get a hold of. They don't answer your emails, they don't return your phone call, and eventually you kind of have to make the assumption that they don't want to be part of it. But we have emails back from these places saying, you know, we've looked at this and we don't want to participate. So.
Charles, now you know my life and how it is to work with nurses. If they don't like what the doctor's saying, they just ignore us.
So, yeah, that was, I don't know, interesting. But in the other fields, I think we've gotten some good cooperation. So what we've got for you today is we've got 3 major sections of the briefing with findings and recommendations. So first, I'm going to take you through a very broad view of Texas's state-level position in terms of graduate education and research, so viewed against other states and other countries. And we're going to see some implications from that. Then I will take you through a very quick summary of the labor market analysis that we've been doing on which fields may generate demand for graduate education in the next decade or so in Texas. And then Rita is going to lead a discussion on findings and recommendations, primarily from the case studies having to do with the process that institutions and the coordinating board use to develop program proposals and to review those proposals. And then I'll take the mic back after that and give you some concluding thoughts and a summary of the recommendations. So let's look first at the position of Texas. You've heard from us, I think several of you, many times before, so I don't think it'll strike you as unusual that we've developed a conceptual model to guide what we're doing. And this logic model here articulates a chain that starts from the inputs of funding of various types, students entering higher education, the outputs of research and graduates that come out. Those generate outcomes in the state of Texas, so a skilled workforce, that's good for business, innovation, new ideas, new companies, business growth, and institutional prestige. So as institutions establish a reputation that's nationally and internationally competitive, that brings benefits to the state. And all of those combine to enhance the competitiveness of Texas as a state, as a location for people to choose to locate, for businesses to operate and to grow. And so this is kind of our broad conceptual framework. And we're going to take you through a set of indicators of many of these inputs, outputs, and outcomes. As you could guess, not everything on that chart can be easily measured, but we're going to focus on those that we do have measures for. And throughout, we're going to use the other three largest states in the country as comparisons. So almost everything I do with you today, I'm going to show you Texas as against California, New York, and Florida. I'm going to typically show you the most recent value as well as what it looked like 10 years ago. So you get a sense not only of how does Texas compare to the other states, but what's happened over the last 10 years. And for many of the indicators, we're also going to rescale the indicators by state population. So we're going to normalize the other three states to what would their indicator be if it was scaled to be exactly the same size as Texas's population. And we won't do that for all, but we do that for a number of them. All right, so first I want to start with graduate degrees. So what you see, I'm going to show you a whole series of charts that are all formatted identically. So hopefully we'll kind of go through one and then you'll get the sense of how this works. So what you've got here is you've got the 4 states. You have 2 bars representing 2005 and 2014. The total height of the bar is the total number of graduate and professional degrees that were awarded in that year. And the 2 colors in the bar show the distribution between public and private institutions. And we have, in most of our analyses, we have actually dropped out the private for-profit providers, which are significant in some professional fields, but we've chosen to mostly focus on the public and the private nonprofits. Okay, and what you can see here is that you can see all 4 states have been growing in graduate education. You can see that Texas has been growing pretty strongly, about a 41% growth rate over this period. In absolute terms, Texas is still behind California and New York. Now let's look at the same thing scaled by population. So I'm going to look at the same thing. The Texas bars are exactly the same as they were, but we've rescaled the other 3 states up or down in proportion. So now you see, while Texas was behind California in absolute numbers, if we do this on a population basis, Texas has actually caught up to California's level of production. And you can see, I know it's a little hard to see on this graph, but Texas actually closed the gap with California over this 10-year period. One of the other features...
Did we really close the gap? It looks like we were the same place in 2005.
I think we were Texas was a little bit under California in 2005, and now is right at about California's
But what
level.
the previous slide and this slide tells me is that we're far exceeding everyone else in public degrees.
Yes, that's right. And I do want to point that out, is Texas is, I mean, you can see that, I think, in two ways. You can see that as a success of the Texas public education system, but you can also see it as a weakness in that this state has very few highly competitive research and graduate education universities in the private sector. And so if you think about from the point of view of state competitiveness is almost totally dependent on what public higher education is doing. Whereas in California, and even more so in New York, the competitiveness of those states is not solely dependent on what's going on in the public university sector.
Well, in fact, it's the opposite. In New York, you have a tradition of really excellent private institutions. Public universities are not nearly as strong, and the difference with California is you have some private powerhouses like Stanford, USC, the Claremont colleges that Texas doesn't have the equivalent of.
That's right. And in California, you really have a kind of a balance between
Public and private.
very strong publics and very strong privates. Whereas, as you said, Commissioner, in New York, it's mostly strong privates. In Texas, it's mostly strong publics.
When I was in New York, I don't know if they still have it, but I was at a private university, and we actually received money from the state when a student completed a graduate degree. And they didn't have to have a public institution doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a breakdown of where the private, not-for-profit graduates are from, their home of residence? Because I would tell you that my thought is most of the graduate students graduating from Texas, nonprofit institutions, are probably Texans, and there's a lot of Texans in California and New York that get a degree and come home.
Yeah, I don't think we have that data, but there is certainly a connection between getting a graduate degree in a particular state and sticking around in that state to find a job. That's not to say that it's a one-to-one automatic, but I think there's a real argument that if Texas wants to grow industries that depend on highly skilled, innovative labor, that it's important to have Texas graduate programs that are producing those workers, so that it encourages businesses to want to come here. What we heard in a lot of the case studies was that many students from out of state or out of the country who come to graduate school in Texas stay in Texas to work after they get their degrees. Let's look a little bit at R&D funding. Federal funding for research is extremely important. Of course, it's intrinsically important to the research that it funds, but it is also a key determinant of institutional position and prestige. And the overall R&D funding has been almost perfectly flat over the last 10 years, except for a bump up during the stimulus, during the end of the Great Recession. And what you can see is that Texas ranks below California and New York in terms of total funding. I don't have a chart where I've done the population adjustment, but Texas receives a third of California's level of funding in absolute terms. And if we did a population adjustment, Texas would be receiving half of what California gets in a population basis. Also, you'll notice, while it's not a huge decline, Texas's line is trending downward the last few years, whereas, New York and Florida are not trending downward quite as much. So let's see how that plays into the development of research universities. I'm going to show you two different ways of looking at research universities. First, I'm going to use the Carnegie classification. So if you're familiar with that, Carnegie organizes all higher ed in the country into a whole bunch of different categories. They have developed standards for what counts as a research university, and they divide the research university group into a high, medium, and low activity group. So Carnegie Research 1 is the highest activity. That's the lowest segment of these bars. And what you can see, what's actually quite remarkable is Texas has added 9 Carnegie-recognized research universities in 10 years. You can see the other states have not moved to nearly that extent.
Excuse me, Charles, is that Tier 1? Is that
Yes,
that
Tier
phrase?
1, R1 is commonly called Tier 1. Yes. So so the light blue R1 group is commonly referred to as Tier 1. And what you can see is, so Texas has added 9 overall and has added 5 Tier 1 or R1 institutions. So you can see, for instance, California, which is really, in many respects, the powerhouse in the U.S., has had no change in the number of Tier 1 institutions and has had a little bit of change overall, largely coming from a few more Tier 3 institutions. Whereas you can see in Texas, actually all the categories have been expanding. And that's all the more remarkable because I just showed you that federal funding for research and development hasn't increased over the past 10 years. It is important to note, just as a sort of technical matter, the number of Carnegie-recognized research universities is not a fixed quantity. It's not like it's a top 200 ranking and there can only be 200. So the number of research universities has increased 20% nationwide over this 10-year period. So Texas has gone from 16 to 25. If Texas had followed exactly the national average, it would have gone from 16 to about 19. So the fact that it's gone to 25, it's considerably faster growth than the average. Now let's look at a more global ranking. We're going to use the Shanghai Academic Rankings of World University, which is heavily based on graduate education and research. This is a top 500 ranking. So unlike the Carnegie, this is by definition fixed. Every year there are only 500 global universities on the list. So you can see that even though Texas has added 9 Carnegie-recognized universities, it's actually lost 1 globally recognized university. California and New York have remained constant, and Florida has also lost 1. Part of the reason for this is because competition, especially from Chinese universities, is accelerating very dramatically. And so over this 10-year period, the number of American universities on the list went down by 13%. So Texas's loss of 1 is roughly on par with what's happening in the country overall. But it does show that what we saw in the Carnegie measure, with a big increase in the number of research universities, is not currently being translated into globally competitive research universities.
Charles, are all the member institutions of AAU included among the top 500 universities worldwide? You probably can tell where I'm going with this point.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have specifically looked at it, but I would think almost all of them would be.
Yeah, I think all of them are. And the reason I raise the question is because I think the increase in the number of Carnegie Tier 1 universities in Texas is not as significant in terms of research potential and research attractiveness as membership in AAU, because every one of the top, 25, 30 universities in the country in terms of receiving federal research expenditures as a member of AAU, but not necessarily a member of the Carnegie Tier 1 category?
Yeah, I guess I haven't looked in detail. We're going to actually show research and development total expenditures in a couple of slides, and I think that will shed some further light on this distribution. I view the increase in the Carnegie, even the R2s and R3s, as very significant precursors to the development of competitive research universities. Those R3s are not nationally competitive institutions, but they have built the fundamental infrastructure that, given time and significant resources, they could become nationally and even globally competitive. And that's kind of the question.
Yeah, my point is that if Texas is going to significantly increase its federal research expenditures and change that downward decline in federal research support, we're going to have to produce more AAU institutions.
Yes, I think that's right. I think we're going to see that in a second. So there's also this, the bar chart here is the top 500. So Texas has 10 top 500, California has 13. So given the fact that California is a considerably bigger state than Texas, well, that doesn't sound like a poor competitive position. It sounds pretty competitive. But if you delve further into this list, what you'll see is 11 out of the 13 in California fall in the top 100 globally, whereas only 4 of the 10 in Texas fall into that top 100. So again, Texas has got a foundation of universities with research capacity and with some degree of research volume and with some degree of national and global recognition, but not primarily at the top international echelons. And I think that's really just another way of looking at this.
Which one dropped out of the 500?
I need to look back at my spreadsheet. I don't remember.
Well, it wasn't necessarily that it got worse. It's just that the competition.
That's right.
Bumped
That's right. It's
it.
unlikely that the
Right.
performance went down.
They got bumped.
Still, they're not in.
Yeah, they were probably just on the lower edge of it.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Now let's look at the degree completions by broad field to see what's going on. Okay. So here again, we're going to compare current and 10 years ago. We made the bars go the other way to make it a little more readable. So these are the degree completions per year. And what you can see is business, education, and health are the largest broad fields. Business and education, you'll notice, have actually had a high growth as well. They're large and they've been growing. Education is large, it hasn't been growing quite as strongly. There's also quite a lot of social science, liberal arts, there's some engineering, there's law. Law has actually been shrinking, and some fine arts. One of the things that is noteworthy is that the other 3 states that we looked at, Florida, California, and New York, are all growing their graduate engineering degrees much faster than Texas is. In fact, Florida, which is a considerably smaller state, and at least in my sense, less industrialized as well in terms of its economy, 10 years ago was well behind Texas's production of graduate engineers. And over this 10-year period, Florida actually surpassed Texas, not even adjusting for the difference in population.
Do you have data on what percentage of those graduates are international students compared to domestic students? Because that's a huge factor.
Yeah, I don't have it at hand, but I believe the data is coded that way. We got this from iPads, and I believe that the data is coded according to U.S. and permanent residents versus international. And certainly international students make up a sizable proportion of graduate degrees in some of these fields. Let's take a broader view. Let's just look at the whole population of the state. And now we're going to just ask, what percentage of the people of working age have a graduate degree? So in Texas, that's about 9%, I think just under 9%. Turns out that's a bit behind where California is. It's more like 11% in California, more like 13% in New York. Florida is about similar to Texas. So this is another kind of reflection, and this is obviously going to be a much longer term measure, because to affect this graduate attainment rate, you have to produce graduate degrees over a long period of time or import them from other states where they are produced. All right, now I want to look at some institutional data to look more at what the landscape of institutions is in Texas and to help you think about strategic planning going forward. So I'm going to show you each of our 4 states. What we've done is we've set a threshold of total research and development activity of $50 million per year, which represents a moderate level of activity in R&D. And we've color-coded these bars by public, private, and health-related. So what you can see is, you see that California has a bunch of institutions. 11 of California's institutions perform above $200 million a year in R&D. 2 of them perform above $1 billion a year in terms of R&D. And you can also see, kind of a, a fairly smooth progression. You have some really, really big performers, you have some more moderate performers, and you have some, slightly lower performers. And of course, there's lots of institutions that don't make the chart because they're under 50 million. New York's chart actually looks a little bit different than California's. You got 2 institutions that really stand out in the kind of 800 to 900 million, and then it kind of really drops off to more like 400 million, and you have a bunch of institutions there, and then it kind of tails down. We look in Texas, we also see a fairly smooth pattern. The tallest bar is just about 800 million. But one of the things that is really noteworthy in Texas is, except for A&M and UT Austin, all the large performers in Texas are the health-related institutions. Those are the blue bars on the chart. And Texas's separation between general academic and health-related is also affecting national and international ranking, because you've got these institutions separated, whereas in most other jurisdictions, they tend to be combined, or at least many of them would be combined. And so that tends to, institutions with academic medical centers tend to consistently show up with higher volumes of research, higher number of graduate and professional degrees. I'm going to come back to this in a second. So Florida's got many fewer institutions in this range. It's really only got 1 institution that's really at the top national rung, and several institutions that are much more moderate performers. Let's go back to Texas and think about strategy. So if you are concerned about increasing the competitiveness of the universities in the state, and by extension, the competitiveness of the state economy, you want to think about increasing at different points in this spectrum, and the sort of the colored arrows give you a kind of rough sense. You've got about 3 institutions that are nationally prominent already, and that could go further. I mean, we saw in California a couple of institutions already over $1 billion in research expenditures. So you could push those up. You've got a couple of institutions that are in the 400 to 500 million range. You could think about trying to accelerate them up to the maybe 600 to 800 million. You've got 3 institutions that are more right around 200 million. Maybe you could get them 300 to 400 million. And you've got a series of institutions that are kind of 50 to 100 million or so. And you could think about trying to push those up to potentially 150 to 250 million. If you're thinking about national and international competitiveness of prestigious institutions, you probably don't need to worry a lot about the rest of the institutions that fall below this about 50 million in total R&D. I also just want to point out, in case anyone wants this sort of technical detail, we decided to use total R&D expenditures. This is not externally sponsored research. So some of this volume could be internally sponsored by the university's own funding as long as it's separately budgeted. So 50 million of total volume may be 35 to 40 million in some cases of externally sponsored research. So when we sort of think about policies, that may be important. Now you've got, I think you probably know very well, you have a number of legislatively funded incentive funds that provide resources to research-active universities. These often require some kind of matching, either private gifts or, in effect, matching federal-sponsored research. And all of those funds are a smart strategy to increase competitiveness to try to bring more of that federal R&D funding into the state. If you and the legislature want to see Texas increase its competitiveness, then the legislature ought to think about increasing allocations for these programs. We favor generally concentrating these resources on institutions that have already demonstrated substantial ability, such as the ones on the chart. And all of your existing programs have those as rules. The institutions have to meet certain thresholds to become eligible. We think that's the right approach. You do not want to take a big pot of money and salami slice it out over a large number of institutions, because that will not help any of them achieve national competitiveness. So instead, you want to have programs that target. But again, as I showed you on the chart, you're not going to accomplish sort of all these up arrows with one single program, because you have institutions that are at different positions now, and they're going to have different opportunities and different needs. So it's highly appropriate to have some differentiation. What UT and A&M and MD Anderson need is going to be different than what UT El Paso or UT Arlington might need. One of the things we did here in the case studies was that some of the local matching requirements, particularly that matching funds for certain programs come from non-state sources, are difficult for the less prestigious institutions because they typically don't have the same power to raise private funds. And so it may be appropriate to rethink some of those details in view of encouraging greater research competitiveness. In particular, we were thinking about the governor's initiative, which helps to recruit nationally prestigious faculty from out of state. And I understand that there's a requirement that the institution has to provide an equal match of non-state funding. Well, might be worth rethinking that, because in the end, if you really have the opportunity to bring a nationally prominent faculty member with a research laboratory, often with funded grants, into the state, I don't know, is it really that important whether you have fundraising to support that, or the fact that you can get this person in who's going to build a research lab for that institution? Maybe that ought to be enough to qualify.
I have a question.
Yes.
When you say relaxing some criteria, is our criteria so different from California and New York?
Other states do not have programs like this, at least the other states we've looked at. In California and New York, the systems take the legislative appropriation and they break it up into campus-level appropriations. One of the interesting things they told us in New York is that they used to use a formula to divide up the state appropriation in a broadly similar way that you do in Texas. But the New York State Legislature has not appropriated any changes in the higher education appropriation in 10 years in that state. And so the system made a political decision not to reallocate the campus allocations as long as the legislature. So they've just frozen every campus's allocation at what they got 10 years ago, regardless of whether they have increases or decreases in enrollment, changes in program, changes in research, whatever it is. They're just, everybody's getting the same thing they got 10 years ago, and they don't do any assessment. California told us that the people we interviewed said, we're not sure how the top leadership in the system decides how to break up the appropriation. They make that decision. We believe that they are sensitive to changes in enrollment, at least, but it's not done with a publicly available formula where you could backtrack and say. So the other states seem to have a kind of a much more, I'm not sure exactly what the right adjective is. Texas has got a much more open system with explicit incentives. If you meet this criterion, you are entitled either to this funding or you're entitled to compete for this funding on this basis. Where in other states, it seems to be much more of maybe even a kind of a backroom idea about, okay, well, somebody's going to just decide who gets what.
I think two good words would be opaque or cloaked.
Mm-hmm.
So to the question, the suggestion you had about removing the strict requirements on matching funds, do we have examples where there was opportunity that was lost because they could not raise matching funds? Because I think the institution raising matching funds, I haven't seen that to be a very difficult thing if you have the opportunity to get a nationally recognized faculty member with a research lab. I'm just asking.
We did hear that in one of the case studies. We can look through the notes to see if it came up. We heard a very strong case from the leadership of one institution that is in the Emerging Research Universities group, but has said they have not been able to raise the required matching funds even when they have identified faculty members who are willing to relocate to their institution.
So did they have a reason why? Because I think the others are being successful. Was there a true effort, or they just had a real reason why they were not able to?
My sense is that it's an institution that has achieved a moderate degree of prominence in the state, but has not historically had success in private fundraising. So I don't know that it's, first of all, I don't know that it's a permanent situation that can't be changed in the future. I mean, they certainly know what the rules are. But when we asked their leadership for kind of, top wish list of what would you change if the coordinating board would change something, this was high up on their list. Said, we would love to take advantage of this program. We think we're an attractive institution, but we don't have, I think it's an institution that doesn't have as long of a track record in high research activity. And so therefore, it may not have as good of a connection with donors. And I think it also may face obstacles even in recruiting the faculty, given the lack of that tradition. But they claimed, at least, that they had faculty who were willing to come and set up labs, but they were not able to raise sufficient matching funds.
But that wasn't a universal ask on others' wish list.
No. And certainly the prestigious institutions have no difficulty. And what this institution said was, we would be willing to match the governor's initiative funding, but we would like the flexibility to reallocate, for instance, tuition dollars to do it. And that, as I understand, that's not permitted. They've got to get truly external funding. They said they did not ask that the matching principle be removed. What they asked for was allow us a greater degree of flexibility in the types of local funding that we could use to satisfy it. Let me transition to our overview of labor market demand, which I'm going to do fairly briefly. There are two broad ways that we can see occupations generate demand for graduate degrees. So the first is there are some occupations where a high share of the people in the occupation have a graduate degree. Physicians is an easy example. You must have a graduate degree to be licensed. There are other occupations where maybe it's not a licensing requirement, but typically a very high fraction of people have a graduate degree. If those occupations are growing, that's going to generate demand for degrees. But there's another method of generating demand, and that is you can have an occupation that maybe has quite a small fraction of graduate degree holders, but the occupation is so large and growing that that's generating demand. And registered nurses are a great example. Only about 9% of registered nurses in Texas hold a graduate degree. But it's a huge occupation, and it's a rapidly growing occupation. So it's generating demand for Master of Science in Nursing and doctor of nursing practice. So basically, if we look here, Texas Workforce Commission gives us 10-year projections, currently from 2012 to 2022. So the first thing we do is say, TWC tells us how much each occupation is supposed to grow in 10 years. So the simplest thing we can do is say, well, let's assume the same percentage of workers that have graduate degrees in 2012 will have graduate degrees in 2022. So that's the constant share assumption. We could also say, over time, many occupations tend to increase their demand for graduate degree holders. So we might say, well, maybe the share is going to increase. So that generates two potential estimates of future demand. So we have kind of the blue crosshatched area, which is the low increase, and the blue plus orange area, which is a high estimate. Today, I'm actually only going to give you the low estimates. So everything I'm going to show you today is not assuming that any increase in the share. So if 9% of registered nurses have graduate degrees today, we're just going to assume that 9% of them will still have graduate degrees, and it will not go up to 9.5 or 10 or 10.5. We use data from TWC. We use analysis that we've done from the American Community Survey. We use some Bureau of Labor Statistics data as well. And so here's a high-level summary of the projected increase in graduate degree demand. And it's important to know, these are projected increases. These are not the total number of graduate degrees. This is the increase in the number of graduate degrees. It's accumulated over a 10-year period. So when you see 35,000 for business, that means 35,000 additional graduate degree holders over that 10-year period, or about 3,500 per year if you want to think about it on an annual basis. So you see we've got business, healthcare, teachers, post-secondary faculty, fairly important. And as we think about universities expanding, obviously they're going to need faculty. Computer-related occupations, engineers, a few lawyers, and some miscellaneous that didn't fit in our categories. And a little while ago, I showed you the graduate degree production. And the graduate degree production increases over the past 10 years are somewhat consistent with what we see on this. We don't necessarily see a totally different picture. We saw business, healthcare, education all as growing strongly. However, I did point out we don't see engineering graduate degrees growing much in Texas, and we do see some demand for graduate engineers. So again, that may be a field that's worth a little bit of further notice.
So the question is it demand for the student, or is it demand for the field for employment? Is it students that want to get that degree in the future, or is it employers want to hire people?
Jobs, right?
Okay.
So we don't have. I think if you remember the previous project when we looked at workforce data, we don't have a very good method of exactly correlating jobs to degrees, what field. So the best we can do is say these are jobs that are in business where people hold graduate degrees. These are jobs in healthcare. These are jobs in teaching. So some of these categories are going to match up with our degree production categories very well. For instance, teachers will match up quite nicely with education, but others will not. The computer-related jobs here could be filled by graduates in the sciences because computer science is considered a science. They could be filled by jobs in business because management information science is considered a business discipline. They could be filled by people in other social sciences. Often computer systems analysts come out of the social sciences. So some of these are going to fit nicely in a one-to-one way, and others are not.
Doesn't the engineers seem awfully low? I mean, that is just screaming at me. I would have thought that'd be 2 or 3 times as many.
The projected growth rates for the engineering occupations from TWC are not that huge in the state of Texas. It's also a profession that's considerably smaller in aggregate than business, healthcare, or teaching.
David, I think you'd find if you disaggregate the data in Texas, the demand for engineers at the BS level is much higher than that. Remember, those are for graduate degrees.
Right. And I understand a lot of people will get that bachelor's degree in engineering and they'll get an advanced degree in another field.
Business, yeah.
Yeah.
There used to be an issue, I don't know if it still is, Charles, but background still at university
Microphone?
that someone receiving an undergraduate degree in engineering, salary would frequently be somewhat similar to someone getting a PhD in engineering.
Yeah, actually what we heard in the case studies was the overwhelming majority of engineering graduate students are foreign citizens who come to the U.S.
Right.
And what we heard in the case studies was that companies typically offered the same salary to an American bachelor's graduate as to a foreigner who earns a master's degree and then seeks work. Now, they may make some differentiation later in career because they do recognize that there's a skill difference, but there's a kind of compensating differential. And that institutions we visited told us that they had a lot of difficulty attracting American bachelor's holders in engineering into their graduate programs after they got their bachelor's degree because they didn't necessarily see a salary premium. They did say some of those American bachelor's holders will eventually enter a professional engineering graduate program later in their career when they reach a point where they see a clear need for deeper skills and knowledge, but they're not typically going to get it soon after their undergraduate because they just don't see the return at that point.
As you suggested, many of them become managers and get degrees in other fields. They couldn't get those jobs without their undergraduate degree in engineering, but they've essentially become a manager who knows how to interact and communicate with
That's
engineers.
right, that's right. And one of the limitations of this analysis that we're showing you right now is we don't know what field of study these people got their graduate degree in. We know that X% of people in a management occupation hold some kind of graduate degree. But we don't know if it's a management graduate degree, or it's an engineering, or it's a social science graduate degree, or it's a humanities graduate degree, for that matter. All we know, unfortunately, from the data is that they hold some kind of graduate degree. And so the association here is pretty approximate, and I don't want you to get carried away and say, well, that says we need 3,500 graduates a year in business, and we're only projected to produce 3,100, and now we have this shortage. I just don't think we can use the data. But I do think we at least get a general sense of where demand is going in the future, and that the institutions, Rita will talk more about this, that the institutions can supplement this highly general approach with a much more discipline-focused approach when they're thinking about expanding or developing a program. Let me pass it over to Rita now.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about findings and recommendations from our case studies. To analyze the effects of potential policy choices, we need to understand the institutional decision-making process. And to do that, what we did is, the first thing that we did is we developed a conceptual framework that guided our approach in examining why institutions expand or propose certain graduate programs. At the center of the framework is institutions' decisions to expand or not to expand graduate programs. And surrounding it, we have factors. Some of them are external to the institutions. They're colored in gray, while others are internal to the institutions. They're colored in blue. And all of these factors feed into the decision-making process. So, for example, some of the external factors include labor market and student demand for graduate programs, as well as the extent to which there are established programs within a field that are competing with each other. In terms of factors internal to the institution, that includes institutional mission, whether they see themselves as an education, primarily educating students as opposed to research institution, as well as the institutional capacity, including the extent to which they have research faculty and funds allocated for research. And using the framework and the data that we collected from the case studies, we then derived motivators that were reported by the institutions to drive new graduate program proposals. As you see here, we classify the motivators across a continuum. On the top part of that scale is I guess what you consider the institutional level, and the lower part of the continuum is departmental level. And institutional level motivators are concerned with the positioning of the institution itself in relation to other institutions, while motivators that are closer to the departmental levels are concerned with confined fields or programs. And what I'm going to do is talk about selected findings from each of these motivators and then derive recommendations. So many institutions that we interviewed said that they sought research status because they want to attract better faculty and better students. Also, some indicated that or at least they viewed that there's a need to increase the number of research institutions, specifically R1 institutions. In Texas, there's only 3 R1 public universities, and that is serving the whole state. Institutions seeking research status have taken slow but very deliberate approaches over many, many years. And their desire to become research institutions is documented well in their strategic plan. The pressure to seek prestige or to become research-intensive institution may lead to expansion of graduate programs that are not essential for students or for meeting the labor market needs. Also, moving up the ranks may lead to changes in the mission of the institutions and specifically the admissions criteria, which limit regional access to students. So here we provide a couple of recommendations. The first recommendation pertaining to institutional positioning has to do with the proposal review. Although the coordinating board does require institutions to provide link to their strategic plan when they are proposing new PhD programs, the coordinating board could place more emphasis on congruence between new graduate program proposals and the institution's strategic goals when reviewing the proposal. The second recommendation is more of a general recommendation, and it really addresses student access and equity and changes in the institution's mission. We recommend changes in student access to be periodically reviewed by the coordinating board and by the institutions, because over time, as the institutions move up the ranks, something else is going to be sacrificed. And in these instances, we recommend that the coordinating board and the institutions think of alternative pathways to serve those students who are not eligible to be admitted to the institutions because of changes in the admission criteria. Institutions' engagement in positive margin activities is another motivator for proposing graduate programs. And this really applies to the master's programs. And this is because the master's programs are less costly than the PhD programs. There's no apprenticeship or mentoring going on. Such programs do result in positive margins, and what the institutions have reported doing is taking the positive margins and investing them to grow their PhD programs. And there has been an incredible increase in the online master's programs because they do generate a lot of revenue, and that's because of the scalability, and that's quite profitable for the institutions in terms of putting back the positive margins into the PhD programs. Now, online programs do have advantages. They improve student access, they can cater to the varying needs of students, but also we've spoken to many interviewed many people at different levels of the institutions, and they raised concern about the quality of some of the master's programs, specifically those online programs that are developed through the public-private partnerships. To ensure that the quality of the master's program, we recommend them to be accredited if accreditation for the subject matter is offered. Otherwise, we do recommend that the institution insists that the department develop and implement a quality assurance process that includes independent experts. Evaluating online programs is a bit that are developed through the public-private partnership is a bit trickier because the goals are different. The goals of the private provider is different than the goals of the public. And this is, so the first step is that we recommend that the coordinating board provide guidance to the institutions on provide on how to evaluate the quality of such online programs. There is already some criteria that is used by LTAC to evaluate the online doctoral programs, and the coordinating board could review the criteria and see if some of those would be applicable to the master's program level. Meeting labor market demands is another motivator for proposing graduate programs. And what we found is all departments we've interviewed engage in some type of a labor market analysis effort, but they tend to be quite informal. That is, they talk to the community, they talk to employers, but not in a systematic way. And institutions tend not to systematically use data sets to analyze labor market demands, such as the Bureau of Labor of Statistics and the TWA data sets. So in this case, we provide a few recommendations regarding how to improve market need analysis. The state might want to explore tools that have been designed to gather regular employer input and see whether these tools can inform program development across the state. The coordinating board also could have resources available to the institutions listing the different types of data sets, as well as how to use that data sets, and put all of this information in a consolidated way on their website. The coordinating board or the state could also acquire a license and provide access to integrated labor market tools. The coordinating board is looking right now, investigating a couple of these tools, and they might be made available to the institutions. Also, the coordinating board could require tracking job placement during the program review. because by doing that, it will signal to the institutions that it's very important that they track where their graduates are being placed in the labor market and if they're being placed as intended by their program. And it will also signal to the institutions that they need to start investing in efforts to analyze labor market demands. In addition to workforce demand, there's also the student demand for graduate programs. If there's no student demand, then there's not going to be enough enrollment in the graduate programs. Some institutions indicated that they measure student demand through surveying prospective students, and this is quite unreliable and not objective data, just because they are self-reported, and just because graduate students are interested in a specific program, that does not necessarily mean they're going to enroll in it. But there's also another issue. Even if student demand was captured accurately, it's not sufficient from a social policy perspective, since one of the goals of the graduate programs is to place students in the labor market and to meet the labor market needs. So there has to be, so the institution, a public institution, would want to care about both workforce demand as well as student demand. The balance on how much emphasis is placed on both right now is not defined by the coordinating board, so we recommend that the coordinating board defines to the institution clearer weights. We also recommend that the coordinating board identify best practices in determining student demand in a more objective way and to disseminate those practices to all the institutions. The field, another motivator is respondents' view that there is a need for establishing multidisciplinary fields, and that view, and this is why some of the programs that are being proposed are multidisciplinary, and this includes, for example, programs such as the GIS. The few employers that we've spoken with indicated there is a need for students with multidisciplinary skills, but they were not sure if those needs could not be met through a graduate program in the main discipline with additional courses or with certification within that discipline. In addition, some employers also were concerned about the quality of the multidisciplinary graduate programs. Some of them called it that these programs might be watered down because they focus on breadth instead of depth. Oops, this is. So in terms of the recommendation, we do recommend that the coordinating board sets a high bar requiring institutions to articulate the benefits of a multidisciplinary graduate program, and also a justification of why this program cannot be met by restructuring existing disciplines in the main field and adding new courses or certification. The field case studies also showed that there's competition going on among institutions and graduate programs, more so than collaboration. Now, competition in itself is not bad. In fact, it's quite healthy, and it could lead to innovative programs. But what we did is, but there's also a downside. And what we found is that sometimes similar programs that are competing for students within the same geographic area, and when there isn't enough need in terms of student demand or labor market demand, we found that those type of programs are generating duplication. In the case of online programs, especially in the education field and some of the health fields, such programs tend to be very similar to each other. They have no geographic boundaries, but they also result in increased competition and duplication. Now, the graduate programs in the engineering or in STEM fields, like engineering, is a bit different. They do compete for students, but mostly international students, because there isn't enough domestic demand for those to enroll in those programs. But international students are, there's unlimited supply of international students as opposed to domestic students. So here we provide a couple of recommendations. One is for the university systems to provide incentives to encourage collaboration and less competition. One of the things the institutions could do, the system could do, is have regular meetings with provosts to discuss ways to reduce wasteful competition. Also, in regards to increasing the domestic pipelines into graduate programs in the science fields, the state could provide special stipends for domestic students that go beyond of what the institutions are capable of providing. One of the issues is many of the domestic students have family responsibilities. And as a result, the stipends need to be more comparable to what they would be offered at their job. And here we're talking about, students in the engineering, to be able to, increase their interest. And that's something that the state could think of doing. And finally, this is the last motivator. Some programs respond to professional associations, and this is specifically true for the nursing and the physical therapy, because these associations have recommendations, and they advocate for professional doctoral programs as entry to practice. Everyone we've spoken to in those two areas indicated that they think that those recommendations are going to be requirements. And as a result, the expectation of the employer is going to be different. And now they'll be expecting that the students will have doctorate degrees in those professions. And as such, they feel that there is a need for such programs. So we do recommend that the coordinating board take into account the changes in professional association standards and their future effect on student and employer demand when they're reviewing the proposals. Any questions, or?
We've gone way over on our time. Can we wrap it up just pretty quick?
Sorry, let's wrap up. We just a couple more points. We asked institutions whether the formula funding system was well suited to financing graduate education, and they all told us any formula is never going to match everyone's experience, and it's not worth redoing. We are a little concerned that the formula may be providing inappropriate incentives to these public-private online partnership programs, and so it might be worth considering breaking out online delivery of graduate education into a separate formula category. So it'd still get formula funding, but the cost experience could be allocated particularly to online programs, which may have very large enrollments, versus face-to-face programs, which typically have much smaller enrollments. The program review process was widely viewed as lengthy, but not necessarily inappropriately lengthy. We do recommend that institutions do pre-proposal reviews earlier if they're not already doing them, and that they consider consulting with coordinating board staff at an informal level before they prepare a proposal, so they identify any pitfalls that they want to establish. The other thing we heard is that the perceptions of the quality of the coordinating board staff feedback varied significantly across institutions and even across departments within an institution. And we think it's related to the existence of relationships or experience with the coordinating board staff. The GIAC members recommended that the board consider bringing back the fellows program, where faculty members or administrators are brought for a short period of time to the coordinating board to actually participate in proposal reviews and give them more of a sense of what's going on, and also build some personal relationships. So let me just wrap up and say, Texas already has several nationally and internationally competitive universities. We've already said if you want more of them, you need to focus on those that already have moderate to high research activity. We are looking at a period of strong demand growth for graduate education in the next decade and beyond. That's going to provide an opportunity to grow the prestige and competitiveness of your universities, but this prestige-seeking behavior also should make you cautious about some behaviors, and also to keep an eye on access and excellence from time to time. And this last slide just summarizes what Rita and I have already told you in terms of recommendations. So next steps, we're going to put out the draft report. We'll come back and visit with you more briefly in September to see if you have any feedback for us, and then we'll take this to final. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. Team, we've heard from the RAND company before. If you have any the RANDs, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Rand.
Yes. Can you be sure and let Rex know, and next time I'm sure we'll have all the answers. So this is very in-depth and very good. Thank you.
You're most welcome. It's our pleasure.
Appreciate it. Right, item 5B is a report to the Committee on Activities of the Lower Division Academic Course Guide Manual Advisory Committee. This is an informational item only. Dr. Edgar Garza from Alamo Colleges, Northwest Vista College, and Dr. Janice Epstein from Texas A&M University will provide a brief summary of the latest committee activities. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you for having us. Good afternoon. The ACGM committee or advisory committee is made up of 18 members, 9 representing four-year universities and the other 9 representing community colleges and technical colleges. It's co-chaired by somebody from the four-year institutions and somebody like myself from the community colleges. What the ACGM does, the Academic Course Guide Manual does, it's a collection of pre-approved freshman and sophomore level courses that are offered at community colleges and technical colleges. It follows the Texas Common Course numbering system. It also provides the approval course for the codes, rather, so that we can track that data. The Academic Course Guide Manual also includes the course descriptions. It prescribes the learning outcomes, the skills, attitudes, and ways to measure those for our freshman and sophomore level classes. All this information is available online, either as a PDF or an interactive database for anybody, the public, to look at.
The ACGM is particularly important for transfer students for several reasons. One is that they're guaranteed to be transferable from one school to another. And again, coming from a four-year institution, it's very useful, these learning outcomes, to know when the student transfers in what they have learned at the community college. The core curriculum is included in the courses in many areas. And these are building blocks for the field of study curricula, which are guaranteed to be applicable to the bachelor's degree. And the student learning outcome project aligns the community colleges vertically and horizontally amongst the universities and community colleges.
One of the things we do when considering changes is we consider the information that's provided to us from faculty work groups, for example, the Learning Outcomes Project. We consider what institutions have to say to us. They'll often send up a proposal to add a course. Seldom do they send something to delete, but almost always something to a course addition that they want. We also look at what professional academic organizations are recommending and saying to us. The advisory committee also responds to statewide initiatives like the field of study curricula or the fine-tuning, those kinds of things. And then the committee itself starts to identify courses that are either underutilized or have become obsolete.
So a bit more on that. Recently, in 2014, the committee did decide to review all the courses in the manual, and we were looking at enrollment trends, observation of unnecessary duplication, looking how many community colleges offer it or don't offer it, and universities that offer an equivalent or don't, the statewide enrollment, how often they're offered, if they're not offered very often, and then looking at trends if it's increasing or decreasing enrollment.
So since 2014, well, we'll start with 2014, the committee reviewed close to 1,000 courses, and we looked at a 3-year enrollment trend data that was collected. At that point, about 375 courses were recommended for deletion. Of those, 200 were not offered anywhere. They just had fallen off the records, and so a little bit of housekeeping work there. Another 100 or so were offered at very few community colleges, less than 3, and the rest were just kind of out there. We couldn't show any kind of transferability. Somehow they had worked their way in there and become obsolete. A year later, in 2015, we reviewed another 700 courses. Of that, about 96 were recommended for deletion, again, using that same criteria. In 2016, we're down to about 600 courses, each year continuing the data. So we looked at 3 years worth of history, then 4 years, and then 5 years. So we're looking at trend data now. And in 2016, as I said, we looked at 600 courses. Only 2 were recommended for deletion at that point. So we, over that 3-year span, had cleaned up the academic course guide manual.
And when a course is recommended for deletion, they do have a 2-year period to come back and appeal this. And in fact, in the 2-year period, there was 1 successful appeal, and then there were some courses that are just getting another look at this fall. Just, you know, we don't want it to be too hasty.
I hope that wasn't too brief. Any questions?
Excellent work. We love cleanup crews. We love that. It's a lot of hard work, though. Board members, you have any questions? This group's done a lot of work. Tell us what your biggest barrier is, though.
The biggest barrier...
Alignment.
Alignment. And Texas is a big state. Coordinating people to communicate across the state sometimes can be really difficult. I think one of the things that I've seen working with this committee is a lot of collaboration now starting to occur both vertically and horizontally. And I think if the coordinating board or the state could find ways to facilitate that collaboration and communication, a lot of the barriers that we have there will start to fall off.
Good suggestion. Well, please tell all of your members that we appreciate their hard work very much, and thanks for coming today.
Thank you for having us.
All right, next, item 5C is a report to the Committee on Activities of the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. Dr. Brett Milan from South Texas College will provide a brief summary of the latest committee activities. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yes, my name is Dr. Brett Milan, and I'm professor of English at South Texas College, and I have the honor of serving as co-chair of the UEAC. My other co-chair cannot be here today. She's out of the country, but she's Dr. Ann Kennemer, who's the Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education and Professor of Biological and Agricultural Studies at Texas A&M University. Our committee, very much like the ACGM committee, does have a variety of composition. We are composed of community colleges and 4-year institutions. We're allowed to have up to 24 members. However, right now we have 23 members, 9 of whom are from community colleges, 10 are from public universities, 1 is from a public health research institution, 2 are from independent colleges and universities, and we do have 1 member who's a non-voting student member as well. So with that, we can have a variety of different perspectives and expertise on the committee. We do serve 3-year staggered terms, so every year we have about 1/3 of the committee, fall off, and then, I believe on the agenda for this CAWS meeting, you're going to approve, hopefully, new members for our committee. The official purpose of the committee is for the UEAC to provide advice and recommendations to the board regarding undergraduate education in Texas. So unlike some of the other advisory committees, we don't have a standing mission of approving or disapproving particular things. We are very much an issue, a current and future issue committee. So as Dr. Peebles last year when he did the report for us, he mentioned that this year we would be looking at the Texas Common Core and its implementation and any potential issues now that we were in the second year of it, that's exactly what we have done. However, before I get into that, let me just mention one of the things that commonly gets asked to the members of the committee are what are the benefits of the UEAC both to the institutions and to the coordinating board. And from what we see it as is that the coordinating board benefits from having the UEAC because you have a standing committee where you have such a variety of different perspectives and expertise that meets twice a year, and during those meetings, can provide a good sounding board for potential legislative, suggestions, or maybe even problems that have happened in other institutions, and maybe be able to brainstorm certain ideas. So it also provides a forum to disseminate information to regions across the state very quickly. So many times what will happen during our meetings is that we will get presentations regarding the 60 by 30 text before it's actually presented at other institutions, so that we can provide potential questions that might be asked if it's presented the same way in future forums, and that way it can help coordinating board staff prepare better for those particular types of questions. As far as benefits to the members themselves or the institutions, it does provide for a forum for an exchange of ideas among institutions, especially with such a varied makeup. Our processes many times are, although they're similar, they can have substantial differences on how we do something, and so as we have discussions, we discover those things, and we're able to then clear those up and even find ways to surpass any barriers that may come up that way. And that leads to the idea of aligning as well. And lastly, it also allows for clarification on the members' parts to ask coordinating board staff for clarification on either coordinating board procedure, policy, or even legislative policy that's current or future. This past year, we focused a lot of our time on the Texas Common Core. Now that we are in the second year of implementation, we wanted to see really what were the issues, what are some of the issues that are there, how large are the variety of core classes among institutions. So different institutions had provided some of that data along with coordinating board staff, and we could see that for example, the range of courses within a particular institution's core varied greatly. We had some institutions on the low end that had as few as 28 courses, and then one institution that had as many as over 400 courses that were approved in their core. However, the average was 90 and the median was 79. So more often than not, the courses that were approved for an institution's core were actually very small. So we could see that although there is a great variety, one of the things that we can come away from this data are that there's more similarity than there is difference in it. We also had a presentation, then we discussed LEAP Texas, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's a consortium or association of different higher education institutions in Texas and in other states as well, to really provide institutional collaboration, faculty collaboration, to be able to help implement and share strategies for teaching and for assessment. And so we looked at that in terms of how can that help us implement the core, the new Texas core, in a better fashion. There are certain challenges that we face on how to be able to implement, let's say, teamwork in an auditorium type class. But instead of reinventing the wheel, an association like LEAP, where faculty, it's being faculty led, they're sharing ideas, sharing rubrics, sharing assessments on how these things can be done in different disciplines. So we're excited to see how that can further work within the 60x30 framework as well. And that's the last thing that we were working on this year, which was looking at the 60x30 text presentation, trying to help wrap our own minds around it and also help staff understand maybe wording within presentation on how it gets presented so that it would avoid miscommunications or misunderstandings. And so that we did in the fall, and then in the spring we got an update on that. Our immediate future work is to revisit some of the work that the UEAC had done in 2009. When the core was being revised in 2009, 2010, the UEAC was instrumental in that. And at the time, a report titled Designing Texas Undergraduate Curriculum for the 21st Century included 19 recommendations. But since then, the UEAC itself hasn't really revisited that report. And that report was created under the auspices of closing the gaps. So we want to revisit that particular report, see how many of those 19 recommendations might have been prescient and might even, right now be still relevant under 60x30 text. And so our plans are during the summer to work with the UEAC coordinating board facilitators and my co-chair to review that report and establish some of our agenda points for this coming year. And that's all I have except for any questions that you may have, and I just wanted to thank you very much for your support.
Board members? Please give our regards to your committee members and tell them how much we appreciate all their hard work. Thanks for coming today.
I will. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. You have a great afternoon.
Agenda 5D is a report to the committee on activities of the Field of Study Advisory Committees and the Program of Study Advisory Committees. And Dr. Peoples is going to give this.
Yes, I'll probably be giving these reports now and in the future because potentially there are about 125 of each of these things because of that, there are that many majors and disciplines in the state of Texas, at least. So fields of study are blocks of lower division courses that are not only by law designed to be transferable to a four-year institution from a two-year, or actually from another four-year for that matter, but also to be applicable to that particular degree program. This is one of those efforts to try to streamline transferability and applicability of courses and to reduce the time to degree that students have. So we really started ramping up this whole process in the last few months. We have we've done 4 fields of study. 3 of those are still currently operating. Engineering, music, and architecture are still going at it, so to speak. Some better than others, but they're still working toward trying to create a fields of study. And later in the agenda, you will see the product of the Mexican-American Field of Study Committee. The programs of study, one other comment about this. We did some analysis of degree programs that students who transferred more than 50 hours to four-year institutions from community colleges. We looked at what they declared as a major when they started. We looked at a two-year school. We looked at what they declared as a major when they started at the four-year institution, and we looked at what they actually graduated with in majors. And what we found is that if you take the top 20 or 25 or so, it's pretty much the same across all 3 of those. Well, what happened is majors will kind of move up or down in rank a little bit. So it's those 20 or 25 that we're going to, in our existing fields of study, that we'll focus our efforts on initially in this, because that will impact by far the greatest number of students.
That's right. It's the vast majority of students. Out of those 100 plus, it's really about 20 to 25
about like that.
that we focus on.
And then programs of study we've organized around the 16 career clusters in the state. These are 2-year, mostly certificate and associate of applied science degree programs, and we have had a couple of, we've had 1 meeting of those, and so you will see, constantly you will see sets of rules coming to you for approval that talk about setting up another committee, or they talk about appointing people to serve on these committees. and we are about to start the work of identifying the appropriate subcommittees for each one of those industry clusters and start the work with those. And we've started with architecture and health. And so nursing will be one of the first ones because the pre-nursing advisory committee, they should have their recommendations finished by the end of September.
Excellent.
And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions? Very good. Agenda item 5E is a report to the Committee on Activities of the Family Practice Residency Advisory Committee. Dr. Roland Gertz, Chair of the Family Practice Residency Advisory Committee, will provide a brief summary of the latest committee activities. Thank you for being here. Yes, will you please just push the little red button on your microphone and pull it close?
Okay.
There.
Thank you. And I do want to apologize for not being here last year when I had foot surgery, and it didn't progress quite as quickly as I wanted it to. And I thank Dr. Peoples for doing that. Madam Chair, the advisory committee met one time this past year. In the middle year of the biennium, it hasn't been necessary for the committee to meet more than one time to fulfill its duties. The advisory committee was created in 1977 by Public Law 282 to make recommendations to the courting board about the custodial funds that support family medicine residency training in the state since that time. Since 1979, when the first appropriation was actually granted by the legislature, over 9,400 residents have been supported by the program, and the vast majority of them stay and have practiced to some degree and period of time in the state. We met in April to review a financial report that we require from every residency training program and a written report. And I might add that the financial database that tracks the cost of residency training in the state since the 70s is one of the richest databases next to the WAMI Association up in the Northwest, and was used a few years ago in actually the Institute of Medicine's review of the funding of graduate medical education in the entire United States. And we also produced some recommendations. I would like to thank our members because they do all of the travel expenses gratis when they come to the committee meetings also. If you turn then to the actual recommendation that is on the first page of item 5F, it's very similar to the recommendation that was provided last year. It's not uncommon for the advisory committee to not make any major changes in the middle year. You'll see that the amount of money is roughly the same as last year, except that the per resident amount is going to be about $10 less per person, and that's an estimate because we do not fix the number of residents until we survey the programs to turn that in the latter part of September 1st or September 30th. And so there is when the actual number will be assigned and how much money will be distributed. We do support some required statutory public, rural and public health training, and the advisory committee and thankfully the courting board, you've also approved in the past some basic funding for the Faculty Development Center. I was actually at their graduation 2 weeks ago for their class of 6 since they've been refunded for 2 years, and it was quite a good ceremony, and I do thank you for re-supporting that since that funding was reinstituted. The page right after that recommendation has a history of the funding through the years, and I can say that I review all the written reports, and there certainly is plenty of concern about what might happen in the next legislative session, given what budget issues might be in place. But I do believe that this is a program that through the years has proven itself to be very valuable to the state. And I'd be happy to try and address any other questions that you have about either the report or the funding request.
So let me read Agenda Item 5F as consideration of adopting the Family Practice Residency Advisory Committee's recommendation to the committee relating to the distribution of funds trusteed to the coordinating board to support family practice residency programs for fiscal year 2017 and the report on trusteed funds distributed in fiscal year 2016. So the total amount of funds for 17 is $8,390,000.
That's correct.
Okay. Board members, you have any questions? Yes.
Roland, thank you for your service on this critical activity. I'm looking at your roster of committee members, and I see a number of them that appear to have serving past their term. Is this organization the one that reappoints people? Are we behind, or who does that?
There's been a catch-up that's been needed, and actually I was talking with Suzanne in the back of the room when I arrived here, and some of the appointing organizations have been way behind, and I'm happy to tell you that we have at least 3 new appointees in those roles for the meetings that are coming up, David. Good question, thanks.
So the appointing agencies are TAFP, TMA, this group listed here?
The Texas Hospital Association, and actually, unfortunately, the governor's office was way behind in their appointments.
Okay. Okay, maybe that's something our chairman could help out in the spotlight with the governor's office and the others to get you guys up to speed, but thank you very much.
You bet.
Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair.
A motion
Second.
and a second? Any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you so much for coming today, and please tell your committee members we appreciate their work.
I will do so. Thank you for the support.
Agenda item 5.1 is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request from Texas A&M University for a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in interdisciplinary engineering. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This would be the first of its kind in Texas. And the idea is to prepare students for such emerging fields as materials engineering and robotic vision and energy engineering. Since it's an interdisciplinary degree, it is one of those where the institution can make use of existing faculty, facilities, and equipment. So you'll notice that the cost on those particular items are zero. There does seem to be a growing need, a workforce demand for these kinds of programs. And in fact, I've talked to a couple of people, and they've said that there may be a sort of growing trend toward more diversity at the undergraduate level, and then more specialization at the graduate level going forward. And this may be a piece of that. It's a 128 semester-hour program, which is about 1 hour more than the average for engineering programs in Texas, as is, and it is a face-to-face program.
Board members, you have any questions?
Move approval.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Item 5G2 is a consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request from the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston for a Doctor of Clinical Laboratory Sciences degree with a major in Clinical Laboratory Sciences. Dr. Peebles.
I almost feel like I should recuse myself from saying anything about this degree because my daughter has a bachelor's degree in this field. And I told her I was trying to increase her career opportunities. And she looked at me and said, no, but, but we'll see what happens. This degree would actually be almost unique in the country. There's only one other institution in the United States that offers this degree, and I believe, if I remember correctly, that's Rutgers University offers the degree. So this would be not only the first in Texas, but only the second in the United States. And I will be honest with you up front that initially the workforce demand for this degree was rather unclear to me, and as you would expect it might be with a brand new degree. But I think we were eventually persuaded by the fact that the field of medicine itself is changing to a lot of to a lot of integrated patient care, and that these folks could be a part of that. One of the site reviewers for this particular program was also in charge of hospitals and in their testing programs and their labs and so forth. And he said that he would hire these folks in a heartbeat because he sees it as a part of a trend. And so this would allow UTMB to be on the edge of that cutting edge.
Board members, questions?
Move for approval.
Second.
Have a motion and a second.
Question. Dr. Peebles, answer is no to the institution meet projected enrollments for all doctoral programs approved in the last 5 years. Do you know any more on that? No?
They have not met their projected enrollments in the DNP program, and I don't.
I'm sorry, it's right there in front of me, isn't it?
That's the one where they have not met their enrollment projections.
Well, I support this. I think this is going to be extremely important as we have coordinated care and population health management. And if this is the only one in the state, maybe it's the only one we need because it's largely an online program. It may serve all the needs of the whole state.
That may very well be. Right.
Very good. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item 5G3 is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request from the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston for a doctor in occupational therapy with a major in occupational therapy.
So
Dr.
they decided to go for 2 today, with also requesting the Doctor of Occupational Therapy. This program would be the second in the state of Texas. Texas Women's University is the only other public institution in Texas that has such a program. I think there are some parallels in the argument made for looking at the medicine becoming much more integrated with all of the participants that deal with patient care, becoming parts of teams. And clearly this is one where workforce need is much easier to establish in this. This is also a program that will rely on a lot of prior learning assessment to give credit for the graduates if they've been in the field and can compile a portfolio that will demonstrate that. So this is a degree for practitioners.
Any questions?
It says that attained either as a postmaster's or bachelor's degree. Shouldn't there be a pathway through the master's program before entry to the OTD program? Similar to what our policy has been with DNP?
Can you address that? Yeah, well, the institution is here. I'm sorry.
Okay. So
Yeah,
that would be.
Let them address that too, because I understand your question, but
I'm wondering, is the entry criteria that the applicant has a
Dr.
master's
Fingerhut?
degree?
Yes, so we have Patricia Fingerhut, PhD with the Department of Occupational Therapy, and April Cowan, OTD Program Director.
if you'll come up here where the microphones are at, please. Thank you.
I'm Patricia Fingerhut. And yes, we do have an entry pathway for the master's. This is a post-professional doctoral degree, and so it is unlike the entry-level doctoral degree. What we are looking for is practitioners with considerable experience. The entry level for occupational therapy has been a master's since 2007. So the bachelor's people we're looking at have approximately 10 plus years of experience. And so we're looking at a competency-based background. What we have in the degree plan is a pre-degree semester for those who are coming in with a bachelor's degree, because a lot of the people who are running rehabilitation clinics, administrating occupational therapy departments in schools, et cetera, have been out, like me, 30 plus years, but graduated with a bachelor's degree back in the 1970s. So a lot of the leaders in the field have a practicing bachelor's degree, but of course there's a continuing education competency base to maintain your practicing license. And therefore, what we're going to have is we feel that the bachelor's people are probably deficient in the research area. And so there will be a research requirement, a course we will be offering from that. And the other competency thing will be a portfolio based on the American Occupational Therapy Association competency portfolio program, and they will be guided for update of practice, the occupational therapy practice framework, the most recent one. Be sure that they are competent in evidence-based practice, et cetera, so that they will put together a portfolio that will show their competencies to be able to perform at a master's level and be able to manage a graduate degree.
So your field now, since '07, has been that the master's is the entry level to
Yes.
practice? And so you're going to use that semester to level out the folks that have bachelor's degrees before they actually enter this program?
Yes, because this being a post-professional program, it's not so much clinical practice we're looking at, it's leadership, evidence-based management, and filling a dearth of faculty positions throughout the country. And so the clinical competency of these people is not questionable, and so the leveling will be in the area of research, evidence-based practice, using the literature, et cetera.
Okay. And I see that the other program in the state is at capacity, so there must be a need.
High demand.
I'll move approval.
Very
There's
high demand. Looking a lot of vet.
Second.
Yeah. Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Thank you so much for coming. 5G4 is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request from the University of Texas at Arlington for a Doctor of Philosophy degree with a major in kinesiology. Dr. Peebles?
Thank you. This is an interdisciplinary approach to kinesiology and somewhat connected to these other degrees that we've already seen in terms of making very clear and explicit connections to the field of medicine. There would be 3 tracks associated with this degree: rehabilitation sciences, the physiology of exercise, and physical education. But I think that the anticipation is that many students would wind up in the first 2 of those, as well as the latter where there is demand for it. And again, this is one of those fields where at first there was somewhat skepticism on the staff's part about the demand for kinesiology degrees. But given the fact that it's with its integration with the field of medicine, there does indeed seem to be the sufficient demand to support the degree. It's a face-to-face format. It generally follows the 42 to 45-hour semester format of a traditional PhD.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Agenda 5G5 is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request from the University of Texas at San Antonio for a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in chemical engineering. Dr. Peebles.
This is a pretty straightforward request for a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering. This is also another one of those places where we looked long and hard at workforce demand. The TWC and BLS data suggested that demand was flat and that we may be meeting it already. But if you looked at particularly the information provided by Burning Glass Technologies, there seems to suggest that there is a demand. So in the long run, we decided that this should be approved based on a fall 2017 start and the other contingencies associated with the degree there.
Questions?
Move approval.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item 5H is a report on the FY16 annual report of low-producing programs. This is an information item only. You have a supplement piece of material with your packet, and Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. We went ahead and produced a one slide for you here that kind of gives you the process for determining low-producing programs. And so the standards you'll see in front of you. And so one of the first thing that we look at is what is the average number of graduates for a program over the previous 5 years, and we look at that on an annual basis. And so the first cut is how many programs wind up in that particular category, and this year there were 181 programs where their average number of graduates fell below the levels that you see in that first bullet point there. Then we also look, though, at have they been in that category for 3 continuous years. And if they have, then we can recommend the closure of those programs. We are recommending, and why this is an informational-only item this year is because we're actually recommending no programs for closure. So, but of that 181, there were 55 programs that met the 3 consecutive years. We did something that we haven't done in the past, and we actually contacted each one of these institutions and asked them what they were doing about those programs that were showing up on low producing. It turns out that of those 55 programs, 10 had already been slated by the institutions for closure or consolidation, and 17 of them had already gone through some restructuring. We also have a number of programs there that were sort of closed under the previous set of rules, and that institutions then requested be brought back, and so a lot of them need a little more time to prove themselves, so to speak.
So where it says action pending, we don't know what the action is?
Now, the action pending actually that they're going to close or consolidate.
Okay, so that means close or consolidate?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Very good. Agenda item 5I is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the Frank Phillips College request for a branch campus maintenance tax election. Dr. Peebles.
Well, thank you. As you may know, the way community colleges are organized in Texas, every community college has a taxing district and has a service area. And those counties or those parts of their service area that fall outside their taxing district then are not taxed. But the state does provide for what are called branch maintenance taxes that can be levied in counties that approve of them. And the limit on those is up to 5 cents per $100 of evaluation. Those rates are set by the commissioners' courts once approved. But what it does is it allows the colleges to collect some revenue within that county with the promise that that revenue will be used toward educational purposes in those counties. Frank Phillips, which as you can see by the map is almost in Oklahoma, but not quite. I guess it's almost in Colorado too, for that matter. But way up in the far north reaches of the state, the 2 counties that you can see there in the far northwestern corner are the 2 counties that they wish to hold a branch maintenance tax election in. And part of the role that the coordinating board plays is to vet the applications that they put forward to try to determine whether the existing resources are there, to look at the process they went through, and then to make a recommendation to the board to approve an election for them. And then, of course, the local counties will then make a determination about whether they want to pay the tax or not.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Agenda item 5J is consideration of adopting the Mexican-American Studies Field of Study Advisory Committee's recommendation relating to courses required for the board-approved Mexican-American Field of Study as required by the Texas Education Code, Section 61.823. Dr. Peebles.
So you have in front of you the first fruit of the first field of study committee that has completed its work. And while there's not a whole lot of Mexican-American studies programs out there, it was one of the existing fields of study that was about 10 years old. And we had heard from a lot of sources in the field that they wished for this to be revisited. So we went ahead and set this up. They completed their work in one day, and what you see there is the block of lower division courses that they wish to see approved as a field of study, and then those courses will be transferable and applicable to a Mexican-American studies program at 4-year public institutions in Texas.
Right now, no one is granting this degree?
No, there are several institutions that grant the degree. What this will do is require those institutions that grant Mexican-American studies degrees to accept these courses as their lower division block.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Agenda items 5K 1 through 6 were on the consent calendar. 5K7 is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the appointment of members to the Nursing Field of Study Advisory Committee. This was removed from the consent calendar, and you have a supplemental piece of material. Dr. Peebles.
Yeah, what happened was that we had, between the time that we originally put this in motion to come to the committee, and these things we usually put on the consent calendar, we had an individual who, for personal and family reasons, withdrew. And we have since found a replacement for them, and that replacement is identified in bold on page 1 of your supplemental material, but that's the reason why we brought it to you for a formal vote.
Move approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Agenda items 5K8 through 5-9 were on the consent calendar. 5O is consideration of adopting the staff recommendations to the committee relating to the January 2016 annual compliance reports for institutions under a certificate of authorization, names beginning with A through O. Dr. Peebles, your favorite subject.
Indeed. So this is our semi-annual report that we do. We do A through O, and then we do what comes after O, and then P through Z in the other half. It's yes, all the rest of them. It's getting late. I haven't recovered from having to get up at 3 o'clock yesterday to catch an airplane yet. So, but what you see then in the white pages behind the blue page is a breakdown of those institutions that are operating in Texas under current certificates of authorization, and those that have been turned in all their paperwork and have met full compliance. You can also see those where we have had to go back and request some more information, but you can also see those that have issues either due to financial responsibility, and that means that their federal composite score has fallen below the required 1.5, and they've been put on some kind of heightened financial scrutiny by the feds. And so what we have done is for those institutions that either have financial responsibility or accreditation issues, then we have told them that we may very well request follow-up reports, and that they're required to sort of stay in touch with us as to their status with these institutions.
Need a motion?
Moved. Question.
A motion and a second. Discussion.
So you have 3 institutions with a physical campus in Texas scheduled to close this year. Are all 3 of those in communication with the coordinating board and compliant with the teach-out plans and records are going to be kept somewhere else?
Yes, sir.
Custodian identified?
All of those have corporate parents, and we know that the records would be kept with them. But it's oftentimes a very mixed bag, and I don't know if this had, well, I don't think we've met since then. But we had a school closure a while back, and we were sent, the institution sent the school records to us on a flash drive. Right. And so that's one of the reasons why the repository is so important, because it's hard to do something with that flash drive.
Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Item 5P is a report to the committee on school closures or teach-outs pursuant to Chapter 7, Subchapter A, Section 7.75. Dr. Peebles.
And I'm happy to report that there's only one on the list this time. We seem to have had a half a dozen or so in the past few meetings. But in this one, this is another campus of Everest College. They're going to close their Dallas campus, but they have 2 other campuses within close proximity. And so they've taken care of their students. They've handled all of the appropriate things that they need to handle in terms of student records, and also getting the students transferred or providing them with full refunds. So they've done their due diligence in this regard, as far as we can tell.
Yeah. Rex, on the previous item, you had listed 3 in Everest College in Houston, Kaplan College in Lubbock. Have they been previously addressed by this committee?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is information?
Yes, information only. Other questions? Agenda item 5Q1 and 2, we're on the consent calendar. 5Q3 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the new Chapter 13, Subchapter M, Sections 13.300 to 13.304 of Board Rules concerning standards and accounting methods for determining total research expenditures. Dr. Peoples.
So, as the caption denotes, these rules deal with how we determine what research expenditures are, and more importantly, what restricted research expenditures are. And there's a committee set up for this, and these particular rules were put in place to clarify. We did receive some comments from a number of colleges, actually from the University of Texas at Austin and the Texas Tech University system. In both cases, their comments revolved around adding expenditures to the reports, but in looking at those, what we determined was that by adding those, we would actually wind up double counting those expenditures because they're actually counted elsewhere in the system. And so we rejected those two comments. There was another comment for clarification, which we accepted. And then there was another comment about the definition for sources and uses. It really was a sort of a technical matter about what was the appropriate piece of law to cite. And what we cite in the rule is the original piece of code that provides for this, while the other piece of code that was suggested actually refers back to it. So,
I need a motion or discussion.
Just real quick, so when you reported back to them that you thought those were already counted, did they say, oh, you're right, or was there some other?
you know, as far as I know, we did not, we sent, Ronald Cornelius and I sent an email last week about this, and I have not received any feedback from that at all.
So I'm curious about the comment about the UT Austin and the Dell Medical School. That is the second comment there. I thought our presentation from Rand indicated that a lot of institutions nationwide have an advantage because they have their medical school underneath the parent institution, as opposed to where we've broken them out as health science centers. Is Dell not going to be counted, research monies at Dell Medical not going to be counted under the UT Austin umbrella? Because I thought that was the reason that we authorized A&M to put their medical school back underneath there, and probably why they were the #1 research institution in the state.
You want to try to tackle it?
Well, I'm looking at Stacy, but the medical school research expenditures at UT Austin should include Dell. And so
A component of the campus.
Yes, part of the campus. And then I would add that one of the reasons A&M is where it is because of the
All the research.
They put everything.
Right, but
State research.
They brought everything
Right,
back.
but when we have allowed all those health science center activities to go in there, it really boosted them probably above. And I expect that you saw that UT Austin was #3. I expect as Dell comes online, they'll probably move up and be much more competitive to be #1.
Actually, 20 years ago when we were talking about institutions, one of the things that was talked about at the time, and the institutions didn't really want to do it, was, you know, what would happen if you combine UTSA with the UT Science Center? What would happen if you combine UT Health Science Center in Houston with somebody from a different system, perhaps?
Yeah, we've had that discussion, but I think that I'm not sure I agree with the response that the medical school collect and report data that are different and separate from the institutions. In the case of UT Austin, I think that their model would be similar to the A&M model, and it should count with their research dollars within the parent institution.
Well, it does. I mean, I think that what's important to keep in mind about this, as I understand it, this is a very technical rule about how they report the money to be eligible for some for research funding. And so the funds are all reported. And what this gets to is the fact that the medical schools themselves, even though they may be associated with the university, they still report separately, but it is combined.
Okay.
At the end. So that's the.
I just want to make sure that all the similar institutions in the state are treated similarly.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So you need a motion to approve. I move.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Item 5R is on the consent calendar. Item 5S is a discussion of coordinating board rules of Chapter 5, Subchapter B, Sections 5.21 through 5.25 concerning preliminary planning notifications. You have a supplemental handout for this in the golden paper. This is very important for us to weigh in on this. So, Dr. Peebles.
So I would just give a very brief opening to this. First of all, this is somewhat unusual in that this is, as someone said to me, this is a draft. So this is a proposal for proposed rules, which you would not normally see.
Wait a minute.
Whoops. Wait.
Celia, can you hang on just one more minute? If you go, we lose a quorum. I'm sorry. Oh, we do? Yeah, my bad.
I thought we still
This
had
is
a
a,
quorum.
yeah, this is a discussion item only at this point.
Should be just, yeah, and there's no vote.
Discussion item. It's a
May leave.
discussion item, so there's no vote. It says approval.
It says discussion item only here.
Yeah, it's discussion
It is.
item only.
I'm sorry. So we can lose our quorum.
Well, we still have to adjourn.
After that.
We'd still have to adjourn.
Well, let's consider it discussed and adjourned.
And this discussion started earlier, so we've got a
Yeah.
Is this coming back to us for approval?
yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so we'll get another whack at this.
Yes. So the idea of bringing it to you today is to get some feedback, to see if we need to make any revisions or changes in it, and then probably bring it back formally in the September, October CAWS and board meeting.
Has this been posted so that the institutions can see it?
Yes.
Okay. And we've received no feedback on this?
Not that I know of so far, but it is
I'm
not.
getting some
I'm
no's.
sorry.
Head
It has
shaking
not
out
been
there.
sent to the institutions yet. I thought we sent it out last week.
It has been posted on our website for people to observe it. It has not been posted in the Texas Register inviting comments at this point.
And also, we had a briefing for governmental relations staff, not last week, I believe, but the week before, and we did alert them that this
Yes.
discussion was going to happen and gave them the gist of the rules.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is addressing what the statutory authority that we currently have regarding the issue of expenditure of taxpayer funds before a degree is approved, and we're simply stating that we're going to require that they come to us in their planning phase and have that known to us.
Yes, sir. So this is the requirement that this is the timeframe under which they would have to come to us to inform us of their planning before they could submit a
The shaded
program.
text is the changes, right?
Yes.
This is, we talked about it during an earlier discussion that would require for the professional schools notify the board, they present to the board, and they at least submit their preliminary notification a year before they can submit the actual.
So similar to the question I asked General Counsel, is this non-discoverable? It would be part of an FIO request? FOI, I mean, request?
Well,
I mean, the institutions may have concern that it not be public knowledge that they're in the planning phase in order for us to be able to have some type of a shared decision-making on an approval, a preliminary approval of moving forward on this.
I don't know of any exception to either the Public Information Act or the Open Meetings Act that would cover this type of change. There is a statute currently in place that requires institutions of higher education to notify the coordinating board before they begin planning for a new program. This is simply one, as I recall, that addresses professional degrees and sets certain limits on institutions.
We need a notification at least 1 year prior to the submission of the actual proposal.
The theory being behind that was these are degrees, medical schools, veterinary schools, law schools, that carry significant infrastructure costs. And it was thought that you all would want to know that information, frankly, as far in advance as possible.
So I have a question. You know, I get notified now through, you know, a Google alert is how I get notified because somebody has put out a press release. This is pending the coordinating board approval, right? And so my thought is, you say we already have a rule in place that they're supposed to be notifying us, but they're not, and we're not.
Actually, a statute.
And we're not enforcing it?
We are. This would
Okay.
put a time limit for certain programs, or say you needed to notify us a certain period of time before the actual proposal. Our current rule does not say that, but this would mean, and then they would come, and then they would have to come before you at the meeting following their notification to explain what they're wanting to do, and then that gives you an opportunity as a board to give feedback before they actually submit.
Which is
It's trying to address your concern.
Right.
and that is additional information and an appearance in front of you that is not required. Correct. Yes, sir.
Oh, I have one more question. I know in the past we have done studies at the request of the legislature about the need for whatever. I don't know that we've done one for veterinarian schools, but, you know, okay, for veterinarian schools or for whatever. Do we tie any of that in to maybe this rule saying that, you know, basically don't come bother us with something if it's not really in compliance with the latest study that we've done of what, you know, what we would call the state's necessity to have another professional school? I mean,
I believe I understand the question. And for example, we did a study on the need for additional law schools just a few years ago. That study, as I recall, concluded that no additional law schools were needed, but that if one were to be added, it should be added in the South Texas region. It was after, or perhaps coincidental to that study, that a particular institution
purchased one.
No.
Oh, before that. Okay.
Initiate.
Sorry.
Began instituting action that led to the creation of a brand-new law school. No, I was not thinking of the other example.
Well, my thought is, we do these studies at the request of the legislature, and then, boom, they just still keep popping up. So
The legislature can make its own decisions, of course.
Well, but
Let me add in also that at least for the last 10 years or so, that they will ask us for, if it goes to the legislature, they will ask us for a review, and all of some of those, the staff will provide an analysis, and you guys will, you know, weigh in on that, and if you accept staff analysis, it will go to the legislature. And if you look, for example, at the medical school in the Valley, that came to the board 2 or 3 times, and part of the recommendation, and Stacy actually took a lead in writing this, made the point that the infrastructure for there to be a viable medical school there at some point. That was at least 6 years beforehand. But part of it, we don't do one of those studies every 2 years, and this is a way to make sure that in these type of high-profile things, we're alerting people, you need to know, this is a chance. You may have gotten something in the newspaper before that, but at least a year ahead of time, you need to come, they need to come and present to you guys, here's what we're talking about, and you can raise concerns, and you can raise the most recent study, or you can ask the staff if they haven't done so to update.
Okay.
So it's really in a way, an early alert system triggered by the board's concerns at the last meeting. We were listening very carefully. We thought this was.
I definitely.
So I'm a little confused under 5.24B, 3B. Proposed program is a doctoral program why do we redundantly list doctoral programs in E if they're all doctoral programs except for the LLB? Page 3, under review process B, item 3, B says the proposed program is a doctoral program.
Okay.
That would be a very broad.
Well, yeah, the rule, the sort of proposal you have in the draft you have in front of you actually has two elements to it in terms of seeking notification well ahead of their turning in a proposal. And part of it is that we peg this to the existing requirements for board approval for programs. And currently that's engineering programs that will cost over $2 million over a 5-year period, and all doctoral programs come to the board for approval. So part of what we've done is we've connected a piece of this to that, in that if programs who meet those thresholds then would need to apply for, or tell us that they plan to seek approval for these programs at least a board meeting prior to submitting their proposal, which would give y'all a chance to look at it if you so desired. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is found in E, which explicitly says these programs would have to submit their notification of planning a year before they submit their proposal.
And that section is required, the previous section that you're referring to is in May. So,
Yes.
So it's raising, here are high dollar items that require this to come forward, but with the E, it's hardcore, it's absolutely.
That would be required.
This a year ahead of time. Right now, there's a rule that if a program costs over $2 million, even if the staff has had approval, ability to approve that at staff level, we need to bring it
Right,
cost.
right.
So this is an expansion of that, or a clarification of it, I think, really.
I'm not comfortable with the term may. That's permissive. I think it shall. And I think to clarify it, if you really want to make that a different reporting requirement, you probably need to make a new 4 and put E under the new 4, and specifically put language that this is different. So then you'd have a 3, A, B, C, D, that are all will or must or shall require that institution, and then a new 4 that becomes the E that says these are all 1-year periods. And, you know, there's other doctoral programs, including one we just approved today, that probably ought to be any doctoral program in the health sciences.
We need to work on that language, because, you know, I mean, you see,
Yeah,
bring it up now.
I don't want to wordsmith it too much right now.
These days, it's a very broad statement and includes a lot of things that it wouldn't have 20 years ago, frankly.
Yeah. So a new doctoral program, if adopted, when would they have to pre-notify us before they actually, maybe one board meeting in advance?
Yes.
Okay. So if they wanted to bring it to the fall board meeting, they'd have to pre-notify us before the July board meeting?
Yes, sir.
Is that enough time for you guys to turn it around?
Well, we still have, now remember, that's before they submit their proposal.
Understood.
And then we still have a year to vet their proposal before it comes back to you for approval.
Understand. But is 1 quarter enough time for you?
That would be enough time for us to have something reasonable to say about it. Yes, sir.
So then the question then would be, what about requiring a whole year for these other programs? Because then it's a year plus a year.
Well, for the type of schools that we're talking, degrees we're talking about there, it's more, it really gets into more in the degree itself, which I think was you guys were raising. It tends to need to be a school infrastructure. Many of the other degrees will be within an existing school. So adding a degree in engineering to an existing college of engineering is not the same thing as adding an MD when that
From
doesn't
nothing.
exist at all.
Yeah.
And typically, you know, and a law school is always a separate administrative entity as well. So there was a deliberate idea to think about those degree programs that require totally separate, would likely to require totally separate infrastructure, that cost would be beyond also what you would typically look at a program. Someone who's offering a PhD in something we were not going to consider Icelandic mythology would be within a school of liberal arts, and
Right.
we'd probably say that one of Raymond's friends is teaching this degree somewhere else in another part of the country, and that would be adequate. So we're trying to make the distinction, and some of these other programs are going to be modifications of existing programs. They're going to be updating a program to what might already exist. This wouldn't fit into this, but one thing that's happened a lot in business schools is the addition of supply chain management over the last 7 or 8 years. Cases, that's a modification of an existing program to add 2 or 3 courses, and those are the type of things we'd like to be able to have a quick response to, and not
Yeah, you wouldn't
drag it
wanna-
out too much.
So can I request a copy of this in Word document, and maybe I can run some track changes with my suggestion? And your plan is to post it at least a month before the next CAWS meeting on the Texas Register?
You would have to, yes, you would have to.
I'm sorry, yes. If the intention is to actually bring this back for formal consideration, then we would have it in 30 days prior, right?
That's fine.
We'd have to
Well,
follow
for
the
the
same.
chairman, my opinion is that I wanted you to bring it back to us.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right.
We wanted to run it specifically by you before we even prepared the rules, we said, because it's a new direction. We're trying to respond to your needs, and so we need
Thank you.
we need that response.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Item 6 is adjournment. Need a motion?
Move adjournment.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor? Thank you.